Good morning, everyone joining us in the United States, and good afternoon to those watching in Europe. Welcome to this live panel discussion hosted by the Atlantic Council's Europe Center and Eurasia Center, marking the 20th anniversary of 2003 Thessaloniki Summit by reflecting on the past, assessing the present, and projecting the future of the EU enlargement for Western Balkans, Ukraine, and Moldova. My name is Ilva Tara. I'm a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Europe Center. It is my honor today to welcome our distinguished guests, European Commission's Honorary Director General Pierre Mirel, Dietmar Bushati, former Minister of Foreign Affairs and European Affairs of the Republic of Albania, and Ambassador Ole Shamshur, non-resident senior fellow with our Eurasia Center and also former Ambassador of Ukraine to the United States. Welcome to the Atlantic Council, Mr. Mirel, Mr. Bushati, and Mr. Shamshur.
Thank you.
At the Thessaloniki Summit 2 decades ago, EU member states united behind the promise that the future of the Balkans is within the European Union. The leaders promised to eventually admit all Western Balkan countries and took efforts to encourage reforms and integration. So far, only Croatia has joined the Union, while the rest of the Western Balkan countries have faced severe challenges and made very little progress on their path to the EU membership. With the ongoing Russia invasion of Ukraine and evolving political dynamics surrounding EU enlargement, the question arises, is the European Union ready for a new phase of enlargement after granting Ukraine and Moldova candidate status? This panel will provide an excellent opportunity to investigate, to explore how discussions about the EU enlargement agenda can be revitalized in European capitals, and how can the experience of the Western Balkan countries serve as a lesson for Ukraine and Moldova, and indeed, what can be expected ahead. For those of you joining the conversation live, submit your questions using the Q&A function or join the conversation on Twitter using hashtag #BalkansDebrief, AC Europe or at AC Eurasia. Mr. Mirel, to start us off, what is, in your view, today's significance of the Thessaloniki Summit and the commitment that the EU made during that summit? Mr. Mirel, can you hear us?
Thank you. Well, I would say that beyond the fact that it's a very, very sad anniversary, right? I think it's revealing now in the open, 20 years later, the failure of the commitment, obviously, but also the failure of the current accession process. I think it's clear on both sides. And you know, my take is that when the membership horizon is uncertain, seems too far away, then this is not, there's no real incentive for reforms. That's very clear. So then a vicious circle is developing, and this is what we've seen over the past 20 years. Little reforms because of, you know, incentives are not there. Little appetite from the EU to, you know, welcome new members. One feeding, in a sense, the other. And on top of that, 3 times, one of the Balkan countries, namely North Macedonia, was blocked by Greece for several years, by France, then by Bulgaria recently. So, you know, it has certainly affected greatly not just the process, but also credibility of the EU. But I think maybe one point here I'd like to make is that I think we were very naive, basically, in the years 2000, 2005. That was the end of the Cold War. You know, market economy, democracy are going to flow in a natural manner over the continent or something. And we thought, naively, that that the tools which had made the fifth enlargement successful would equally be successful in the Western Balkans. But we greatly, I'm sure Dietmar will agree with me, that we greatly underestimated the consequences of the war. And we put the rule of law in, let's say, the central position of conditionality, which is good. It had to be changed. But without compensating somehow by major investments, by what I call a Martian plan for the Balkans.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really my take on these 20 years.
Mr. Bouchanti, do you agree with Mr. Murel that Thessaloniki was a failure and the leaders of that time were a bit naive to believe that that would have been a kept promise?
Well, the hopes were very high at the time because the Thessaloniki summit took place just 1 year before the big bang of the enlargement of the European Union with Central and Eastern European countries. And I remember at the time I was a civil servant and we were thinking that in 10 years' time, countries of our region would join the Union. Thessaloniki summit took place one year, or at the time where Romano Prodi, at the time President of European Commission, was speaking about the rings of friends of European Union and about the expansion of European Union at the borders of Russia. So basically, there was no dilemma about the destiny of our region, of Western Balkans. But as Pierre stated very clearly, and I would fully agree with him, later we have entered into this comfortable zone where on one hand leaders of European Union were pretending that our future was within European Union and leaders in our region were pretending to reform our countries and our societies. So basically the process was dormant and I would say in some years or months during the crisis that the EU was going through, like financial crisis, refugee crisis, Brexit and pandemic, we started to believe that the enlargement process was at a clinical stage. Now we are living under a different reality, at least this is how I would like to see it. And I hope there is an opportunity, and what I've called recently, this should be a Jean Monnet moment for European Union to transform this huge, unprecedented crisis into an opportunity.
We will explore that option later on, but I want to ask Ambassador Shamshur, from a Ukrainian perspective, what is the Thessaloniki summit's significance today for you, Ambassador?
Thank you for your question. That's actually looking at, that's a difficult question. Looking at the Thessaloniki summit, on the one hand, I think it was for the first time when EU did recognize, maybe tacitly, but recognize that enlargement is also about security. Secondly, discouraging result of Thessaloniki process, as it was mentioned by Minister and by Director General before, and as mentioned by many experts now, actually it to some extent fizzled out. It didn't produce the results the participants of the summit were actually expecting. In this sense, we are looking at that very carefully. And I would like to stress the second part. Now we have a certain, I would say, almost enthusiasm about Ukraine joining European Union. So we've got this candidate country status and so on and so forth. But it's really important that this emotional and politically motivated outbreak, those decisions are followed by the nitty-gritty work, concrete work, studying, negotiating process. If it happens, I think we will be in a better place. If we will still have the delays, then we would think about the Thessaloniki summit again.
Mr. Mikhail, how did Russia's war in Ukraine alter the prospects for the EU membership for Western Balkan countries, Ukraine and Moldova? that were granted candidate status. Can we talk about a renewed momentum and political will? Is this a new phase of enlargement?
I think so. I hope so. We've seen that the Russian aggression in Ukraine has been, a wake-up call for the EU. And with the candidate status offered to Ukraine and Moldova, a second sort of wake-up call. What about the Balkans? And in particular, countries still considered as potential candidates, also Bosnia and Herzegovina. So it's, I think, it gives it a new momentum. However, pundits talk about the risk of instability, etc. My take is that potential instability in the Western Balkans lies much more, and I would even say first and foremost, in the socio-economic situation and the lack of rule of law. When you have such huge migration flows, emptying, a number of villages in North Macedonia, in Serbia, in all the countries, and the rule of law not yet there, then of course, this is an ideal momentum on the other side for third powers to try to fill the vacuum. So this is where I think, and I hope again, that this is going to push the member states, EU member states, to react. We've seen already several hints at, saying this is the right time to move forward, to do something else, new approach. That was, I think, last year, June, European Council conclusions talking about providing benefits of accession even during the pre-accession phase. President Macron in GlobSec Bratislava last month stated that the current method does not work, so we have to find something else. And the President of the Commission, Mrs. von der Leyen, at GlobSec Bratislava also said we have to bring the countries closer to the single market, increase the funding, etc., which goes very much into what I've been saying for years, that economy should come first. Of course, rule of law attached to, but not the opposite, which is basically what we've done over the past 20 years.
Mr. Bruchante, with the ongoing war in Ukraine, as I said, it appears that the political dynamics of enlargements are shifting. And as we saw in the case of Ukraine and Moldova, the political will in the end prevail the technical requirements. Do you believe that with this, the renewed momentum, the enlargement, especially for the Western Balkan countries, can benefit more?
The European Union is a peace project, so it has been founded as a peace project. And the fact that a country at war like Ukraine applied to become an EU member, it shows the appeal on European project. I would answer your question by saying it is possible, but EU needs to translate into reality this possibility, because we are not yet there. It is also a question of security and geopolitics, because I believe after the Russia's aggression in Ukraine, there cannot be any longer buffer states. So you either are within EU and NATO, or you belong to another camp that is called Russian camp. Let me remind you that in '75, Helsinki process was designed in order to build the European security architecture with Soviet Union then. Nowadays, it seems impossible to work on security architecture of Europe with Russia. So in this respect, it's very important for European Union to offer the concrete instruments to countries in the Western Balkans and also to Ukraine and Moldova, and to have also a time frame for the accession process, because there is a risk that Ukraine and Moldova may end up in a similar situation like countries of Western Balkans if European Union is going to extend the failed accession template from Western Balkans to Eastern Partnership countries.
Ambassador Shamshur, what can be done to avoid that Thessaloniki summit or the pledge and the unsuccessful accession template, as Minister Bushati said, will not be used in the case of Ukraine and Moldova?
So if I knew the answer, maybe I will be closer to the European Commission presidency. No matter that it's not impossible. It's impossible. Answering your question in serious, I think that, the new impetus, or at least imagined impetus, interest to the enlargement now immediately is definitely based by the security considerations. As security has again come to the forefront of the political process, and we are speaking not about soft security, but mostly hard security. And the ability to defend the peace project, as Mr. Bushari mentioned, is really important. And the other part and other factor that influences this possible renewed interest into the enlargement is definitely the economic one. It's quite clear that to be a major competitor in the international markets, the enlarged European market, enlarged European possibility would definitely help. Answering directly your question, how it can be avoided, I said, so now we are at the state of the political decision of the positive emotions. But at the same time, there are some conditions put forward by the European Union to be fulfilled by Ukraine before the start of the negotiation process. It's really important. So if, and I would say when those conditions are met, and we hope that it would be done by the end of this year, the process would be really started without any delay. And we should, and I guess Mrs. von der Leyen was speaking about that, we should be also looking at changing the modus operandi. Rather than saying to the aspirant countries, this is not correct, that's because we cannot start negotiations or we cannot progress. It's really even more important to be a partner, to be a helping hand, and to explain how it can be achieved and what the European Commission, what the European Union can do this to be achieved. But for me, it's absolutely clear that the process of the unification of Europe, so that all those willing and able to fulfill the criteria and willing to be the part of the European Union should be within the European Union in order to stave off the expansionist aspirations of Russia, and not only of Russia, it's also the problem of China and the others. So in a way, now the fate of enlargement is to a large extent in the fate of the members of the European Union, but the definite is not to forget about what it should be made and what will be made by Ukraine and I hope also Moldova.
Thank you, Ambassador. Minister Bushati, with the initiation of negotiations with Albania and North Macedonia and granting Bosnia candidate status, can we assume that Brussels has successfully restarted the enlargement process, but this time will be different?
I do believe that those decisions were also somehow urged by the sense of urgency that the crisis in Ukraine was posing for the entire continent. I cannot speak about the restart or revive of the enlargement process. There has been many discussions over the past years on how to reform the enlargement process. But I believe we need to capitalize on this political moment, which is the most important moment after Kosovo war. Let me remind you that the political decision to bring 10 countries from former communist empire into European Union was taken immediately after the end of the war in Kosovo during the Helsinki summit in 1999. So I see a parallel between that war and the war that is going on in Ukraine. Having said that, I do believe that reforms are very important because European Union is not willing to import instability, to import lack of rule of law and lack of economic developments. I do believe that there are 5 main challenges, at least in the case of Western Balkans, that needs to be tackled into this process. First, there is always this question that Pierre mentioned, rule of law. And paradoxically, although EU was placing rule of law at the very heart of this process, and in 2022, with the new methodology, there has been this reversibility clause, it is very difficult nowadays to explain to the citizens the connection between the reforms and the rewards. So when North Macedonia delivered, European Union was not there. When Albania delivered on justice reform, European Union was hesitant on opening accession talks. When Kosovo delivered on visa liberalization process, European Union was hesitant. Then, if you see all the indexes of international organizations, there is a backsliding in the region with the exception of Kosovo. But for citizens, it's very difficult to realize the link, the connection between sanctions and the countries that have gone backwards. The second issue, which is very critical, it's the issues of bilateral disputes and nodal conflicts. So it's going to be very difficult for European Union to resist Russia's aggression in the eastern part of the continent without addressing the consequences of the war in Yugoslavia. And here I mean Serbia-Kosovo conflict, so Europeanization of Serbia and the statehood of Kosovo, and preserving the integrity of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Third issue is the issue that Pierre mentioned about the development gap. Without a clear access and a clear road to structural funds, provided that Western Balkan countries are complying with reforms, it's going to be very difficult for us to catch up with the average of EU. The fourth are the limits of regional cooperation. There has been this Berlin process, and under the Berlin process, many agreements have been concluded, like the mutual recognition of diplomas and professional qualifications. But coming from this region, we see that doctors or nurses or teachers, they don't want to go from Tirana to Belgrade or from Belgrade to Skopje. They're all looking towards Germany. So with this pace of the so-called enlargement process, Western Balkans risk of becoming a reservoir, a tank of human resources, of qualified human resources for Germany and countries in the north. So we need to reverse this trend. And this is bringing me to the last point, which has to do with demographics. For the very first time in our history, we are seeing a shrinking of our population. And people that are leaving our region and going towards Germany and towards north of Europe. And this goes very contrary to the real notion of the accession process, which is building Europe at home. These 5 elements need to be taken into account if we want to use this opportunity, this window of opportunity that the war in Ukraine has created for the entire continent.
Yeah, Mr. Mihail, how can we capitalize in what Mr. Bushanti flagged as issues there, especially on the human resources that are getting away and they don't want to stay within the region. They're going in the Nordic countries or somewhere in Europe or even across the Atlantic. How can that issue be tackled in your view?
Well, as it was called by a journalist, the know-how generation leaving. And more than that, it's actually the current or potential middle class leaving. those, who could push for reforms in the countries. They are leaving. So it leaves, full and free hands to the autocrats to stay in power. So I think that's the urgency. Migration is really extremely detrimental to development of the whole region. In my view, that justifies putting first and foremost economy in the center of the new approach of the EU. That is to, as Mrs. van der Leyen seems to be supporting that, getting the countries closer to the single market. And in parallel, they have decided themselves to create a regional common market. I guess that the two elements combined should boost investments and therefore offer more jobs in the region. And therefore we are, a couple of us pleading for this gradual accession, moving step by step, very concrete steps, single market, energy, for instance, building on the Energy Community Treaty, Transport Community Treaty, etc. And whenever reforms are undertaken, more funding should be provided, because it's stupid. The current process is completely stupid. You receive little money to prepare for accession during 7, 5, 10 years more, etc. And upon accession, it's kind of cash machine. You receive billions of euros, which of course you can't absorb. The country cannot absorb such an amount of money. So instead, we are pleading for this so-called accession fund after accession to be provided before accession in a gradual manner, once important reforms, step by step, are undertaken. That's a completely different approach, but I guess this is the bold approach that should be considered now in the coming weeks and months. And I think there are good signs coming from several member states in this direction.
Is there something concrete to what we are referring? Given during our conversation, the European Commission's President, Ursula von der Leyen's statement, when she spoke about this Envil four-plan blueprint aimed at bringing the Western Balkans closer to the EU. As she said, we don't have to wait for them to come to us, but we should help them get closer to us. And she actually mentioned the pre-accession funds and increasing the pre-accession funds. Is there any concrete plan? She didn't mention any amounts of funds that will be allocated or any timeline. Are you aware of any plan that is being designed in Brussels that will be delivered on the Western Balkans?
No, this is not clear. I mean, let's be frank. She put the emphasis on cyber criminality, etc. But that's also an element of the whole picture. No, I mean, nothing has been, to my knowledge, has been prepared. What we expect is that in the autumn, which is the traditional period in the year whereby the European Commission delivers its enlargement package, so-called package, we expect, or we hope, I hope at least, that the Commission would come up with a comprehensive document listing the constraints, the problems, and how to overcome these problems through gradual approach, and gives a sort of roadmap how to reach it in a very concrete manner for both the Western Balkans, but also Ukraine and Moldova. What I expect really is something I would call Agenda 2030, making a parallel with what we did in 1997 when we issued Agenda 2000 with a comprehensive document preparing for the accession of Central European countries. Will it happen this autumn? I don't know, but I hope so.
Mr. Bushati, what can the Western Balkan countries do in this stage where there is this political will, or at least the statement coming from the European Commission presidents of the gradual integration of the pre-accession funds allocation? What can they do, especially in the European capitals, that they still are skeptical somehow, this renewed enlargement phase?
First, it's important for Western Balkan countries to act as a region. And in political and security terms, we do not act yet as a region. If you see, for instance, the alignment in terms of foreign policy and security decisions and positions, We are expecting that Serbia and Bosnia and Herzegovina would align with European Union as far as Russian sanctions are concerned. Secondly, we need to have a drive for reforms, and Western Balkan countries need to show the ownership when it comes to the reform process. And thirdly, I would say we need to create also an alliances or a cohort of countries within European Union and bring on board necessarily also Ukraine into this process in order to work with member states also on this gradual accession process. So, namely, access to structural funds and also other instruments that are available. And last but not least, I would hope that we don't act based on the mindset of previous enlargements only. So structural funds, mobility programs, education and research programs. So not just sectoral integration, but I would hope that the European Union will involve and include Western Balkan countries also into big projects like Europe Green. So in the projects related to European Green Deal, to the digital market, to an economy that is based on the knowledge and not on the cheap labor force, on things which will create economic sustainability for our neighborhood.
I cannot agree more with Dietmar. I mentioned a couple of sectors, but it should, of course, the Balkans should be included in all the new projects, like Green Deal and etc. And that can be achieved only if the so-called post-accession funds are provided before accession. Otherwise, it would be impossible for the countries to participate fully into the policies and programs.
Because as we saw, actually, the green transition energy is part of the security of the region too, as we witnessed with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Ambassador Shamshur, is Ukraine ready to take on this new phase, new gradual integration? How do they see their involvement in the process, their engagement? Are they thinking to join forces with the Western Balkan countries, or they see this as a separate process from the region?
I think that this question should be posed to the leaders of Ukraine or members of the government, which I am not. So in my opinion, firstly, I think that definitely all those issues and all those programs that were meant by colleagues are really important, and they would help the process of accession. But as far as I understand, the process definitely should be structured as it was structured before. I don't think that we or European Commission should really invent a new wheel, and we are ready to move into the process of negotiations. Of course, it's important that we have funds, and that was mentioned, the possibility of different approaches and different ways to do that. It's important to be a part of the ongoing programs of the European Union. And at the same time, I think that definitely each country should be measured and should be judged by its merit. And definitely each country should be allowed and should be given the possibility to make as much progress as possible. Although the final, we shouldn't lose the final goal of any phase-in process, which is a holistic process. This is the membership in the European Union, and any new ideas, projects, approaches shouldn't serve as the kind of this subterfuge or the something that is detracting attention from being fixed on the ultimate goal as far as the country is concerned and as far as the EU members are concerned as well. Thank you.
Before I take some questions from the audience, a couple of questions, and I give a few minutes to each of our distinguished guests before closing remarks, I have one more question that is related with, as we mentioned during this conversation, the hope, the enthusiasm for the EU enlargement, especially in the Western Balkans, has been diminishing. I have the case of North Macedonia that has experienced a significant drop support for the EU membership from 70% in 2019 to 50% in 2023, according to the RCC Balkan Barometer that will be published in the next days. What can be done, Mr. Mirel, to restore credibility, to rebuild trust among citizens for this new phase of enlargement?
Well, for me, it's to work on very concrete things, very concrete projects, which are, would be showing to the population that it is something is happening, refurbishing an hospital, helping more than the EU is doing today in terms of connection and transport, and energy in the first place. Before the war in Ukraine, I know that China and Russia together have approached most Western Balkan countries to offer to develop new electricity power stations based on gas from Russia, technology from China, and of course financing from China through loans. But this is exactly where the EU with structural funds should come in place, should come in offering to do that as part of the Green Deal, as part of all efforts to fight against climate change, should come up with its own offers together with the financial means to do it, to reduce the risk of borrowing from abroad. So these are very concrete things that would really speak to the citizens and not just negotiating chapters by chapters without seeing the end process. Thank you.
Minister Bouchante, on the North Macedonia's willingness to become EU member dropping to 50% this year. What do you think?
I've seen this phenomenon from another angle. Probably you have noticed the protests in Maidan Square, but also in Tbilisi and Chisinau. People waving EU flags in their hands, whereas this is no longer the case in the Western Balkans. So when people are protesting in the Western Balkans, they are waving their own flag or the party flag. And this should make EU reflect about its leverage and its position in the Balkans. And it's quite sad because no other foreign actor is matching EU's real presence in our region in terms of economy, in terms of trade, in terms of exchange. This is first. Second, the year ahead, it's going to be very critical because of the Euro elections. There are some encouraging signs because I see a slight move also by President Macron when he speaks about the future of European Union. We've heard also Bundeschancellor Scholz speaking about the acceleration of the accession process with Western Balkan countries. But this will be immediately tested with the distribution, let's say, of portfolios in the next commission. Whether enlargement commissioner will be, let's say, a key figure with international, let's say, credibility, this remains to be seen. Let's not forget that enlargement took place under the portfolio of a German commissioner back in 2004, and there was this German-British duo at the time, and there has been no criticism, let's say, also about how Commission was handling this process. Let's not forget that DG NEAR was operating without a director general for many years. And hopefully, because of this crisis in the continent, in Ukraine, we see finally a director general at the helm of DG NIR. There is not yet a director for Western Balkans. So this shows that the last year's enlargement was dormant and was not a real priority. So I really hope that by bringing, let's say, new instruments into this process and by bringing back the needed political will into this process, things might change more quicker than we might believe also in our region. I want to be optimistic.
Yeah, well, I hope so, that the political will that looks like it is there for now, at least, will be kind of coupled with technical proposals and concrete plans that, as Pierre Murel said, we haven't seen. We don't know much about them. I have a question from the audience. Kevin Farmer asks, if the EU enlargement in the Western Balkans stalls, do you think it is possible that they will form their own economic political bloc? Perhaps you first, Mr. Bushati, and then Pierre Murel.
I mean, we have our limits in terms of regional cooperation. I have always believed, and I'm still believing, that there is no alternative for countries in the region to EU membership in terms of democratic transformation and in terms of economic development. So the intra-trade, the inter-regional trade is saturated, and it cannot compete with let's say, benefits that are being offered in the accession process. Politically speaking, and this is why I was referring also to the case of the Berlin process, it's a good move that we are signing all these agreements on mutual recognition of diplomas and qualifications, but standards of living and the fight for decency, it's a real challenge across our region. So I see, unfortunately, people leaving for the Western Europe and not for countries in the neighborhood. So, but it's important that we steer this energy and we capitalize on this momentum.
Yeah,
but I don't see a room for alternative
for this block. Yeah. Murel, on this question?
No, political bloc. I don't see, what exactly where the future would be with that. No, but economy, yes. The countries have decided themselves at Trieste 2016 to create a regional common market. I should say to recreate, in a sense, the common market of Yugoslavia plus Albania. And that's very welcome.
When you mention names, that's the problem.
It's not a problem.
The region becomes a little bit sensitive.
No, but if you look at the different countries, they have so small markets, fragmented markets. So it's for exchanges, for major investments, it's too little. So it's good, as Dietmar recalled, that there have been agreement, on free movement of goods, etc. But it should go beyond, and that should be in parallel with integrating the EU single market. And again, the two, in my view, should boost investments and help in the economic situation of the region.
Thank you, Mr. Murel. Ambassador Shamshur, your minutes to have your concluding remarks, since we're approaching the end of our conversation. And what do you see? What should be the next steps for Ukraine and Moldova to join the European Union?
I would like to start with stressing again that now is actually the moment, as Burrell said, the depth awakening of the European Union, of Europe. So it's quite clear that during this renewed interest into the enlargement, it's as about economy, rule of law, as it is about security. And in this sense, it's really becoming an existential problem, not only for Ukraine, but also for the European Union in terms of security, but also in terms of economy. So it's about time to understand that and to unionize the rest of the countries who are willing and capable to be the part of the European Union. Ukraine and Ukrainian people is very important, as the support of entering European Union has never been as high as it is now. Is really support is kind of really determined, but I think it's really important that we move on. So we do our part of job, but we move into negotiations and we continue to reform the country with the help of the European Union. Finally, rather than saying this is impossible, because it's really time to say it would be possible if. And I think if we have all those factors combined, we'll have Europe whole, at peace and free. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Mr. Mihail, I have another question that just came for you before I give you your time for the closing remarks. How likely it is, says Nicholas Wright in his question, that the new enlargement drive becomes bogged down in disagreements within the EU about institutional and budgetary reforms?
Oh, right. That's a very good question. I think several leaders, EU leaders, have clearly indicated that in order to welcome new members, some changes in the treaty must take place. In particular, the question of the veto, but not only. I mean, it's clearly, I mean, the expression is to change, modify, modernize, whatever, the EU governance to allow it to function properly in a union with 35 members. There are two possibilities: either to change the treaties right now, that's impossible. I think it would be a failure. Or, in my view, once we are close to the accession of 1, 2, or 3 countries, treaties have to be modified anyhow to incorporate the countries in the treaty, right? The name, their rights to vote, and etc. That would be the right moment to convince those unwilling to change something to do it. Otherwise, there would be no accession. In other words, those who are pleading the most for accession, for enlargement, are those very reluctant to changing the treaty. So by pushing them to telling them, you want new members, fine, but then we have to undertake some changes. And I think there's good hope to do that. As regards the budgetary matters, it comes to the same. In a sense, thanks to we hope that the proposal would come soon for whenever the new financial framework for beyond 27 will be proposed, to include a mechanism to ensure that Western Balkans would receive more funding. But on top of the huge amounts which would be needed for Ukraine, starting with its reconstruction. So will it be sufficient to work with the current budget? No, of course not. So there are various possibilities. I would plead personally for a peace tax, let's call it like that. That would be across all the countries in Europe to help, in particular, reconstruction of Ukraine and to help developing the Balkans. Thank you.
Minister Bushati, do you foresee any resistance from the institutions, EU institutions, as I said, budgetary reforms and institutional?
This might be a long-term challenge. It's not an immediate challenge, and I don't think we should fall under the trap of this dichotomy between widening versus deepening. Of course, as far as I know, the EU institutions, there hasn't been a deepening without widening. So they have been the two sides of the same coin. So it's possible to offer all these instruments to Western Balkan countries plus Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia, like EU was managing, for instance, to respond to Brexit or to pandemics or even to the Russian aggression with unity and creativity without revising treaties. And let's not forget that the Lisbon Treaty is probably the longest serving treaty of European Union. And then the moment that we are ready to join, of course, there is a need for adjustments in terms of representation and budget and so on and so forth. For the Western Balkan countries, I don't think that it's a big challenge in terms of budget and in terms of access to structural funds. Ukraine, it's another case because it's a large country and it has a different potential compared to us. My last plea on this Euro fundamentalist panel goes for European Commission and European Union. Jean-Claude Juncker was speaking about a political commission. Ursula von der Leyen speaks about a geopolitical commission. So I insist, this is a Jean Monnet moment for European Union, and it's important to demonstrate this clearly and to project vision and strength in our continent. Without addressing the consequences of the war in Yugoslavia, it's going to be very, very difficult for the European Union to resist Russian aggression in the East.
And finally, to conclude, Mr. Mirel, how can this experience that the Western Balkans have gone through serve as a lesson for Ukraine and Moldova? If I would ask you to give them an advice, what to do in the next months, what would that be?
Oh, who am I to give an advice to a country at war? But I would draw somehow four lessons from the situation in the Balkans, which I think apply to Ukraine, but also somehow, and some of them still to the Western Balkans. First is manage expectations. Since last year, since the aggression in Ukraine, a number of EU leaders have given hope to Ukrainians that, some of them saying even you could join so quickly. This is not true. This is not to happen so rapidly. And creating expectations, too high expectations lead very easily to frustrations. We've seen that in the Balkans. Second, I would say that efforts, reforms, have to be made sustainable, not just saying, big piece of legislation has been adopted. Great, but will it be implemented? Will it be enforced? Is it sustainable? And here comes the interest of the gradual integration process more than the traditional negotiation process. The third point, which applies even more to the Balkans than Ukraine, civil society role. In Ukraine, civil society organizations have developed a big role since Maidan. In the Balkans as well, but I think they should be associated more closely to the new process, not just the traditional NGOs and human rights, etc., but civil society organizations from in a wide sense of the word, chambers of commerce and industry, professional bodies, municipalities, regions. They have a role to play to avoid that accession process would become a sort of elite, club of elite, writing the music of enlargement in a sort of bubble. And the last remark is media freedom. In countries where judiciary is still far from independent, where national parliaments don't really play their role, media freedom is absolutely essential to, let's say, play an important role in the checks and balances. Just a final point, if I may. Dietmar mentioned that President Macron had made a slight move in favor of enlargement. I would say he has made a major move. His speech in Bratislava at Globsec, for me, was a remarkable move, dispelling all misunderstandings on NATO and EU enlargement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and please allow me on behalf of Atlantic Council's Europe Center and Eurasia Center to thank you for this terrific discussion and evaluation assessment of the current stage of the EU enlargement. Thank you, Mr. Pierre Muhel, Mr. Didier and Ambassador Shamshor. Thank you very much for watching us.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.